All right. Welcome. I'm going to just introduce the session here just for the recording. This is the Youth Exchange Partnering with Organizations within the host community is the name of the session. My overview of this is to offer an opportunity for us to share and brainstorm on the notion that service and partnerships enrich the youth exchange students' experience. It also connects Rotary to the community in new ways, or it can, and connect the host families to the clubs and to the community in new ways. And of course, it'll help those community organizations with whom we partner with. So I've got some examples that I'm going to share, and I'd love to hear anything that you are aware of in your communities. And then I have set aside a good chunk of time for us to just brainstorm on I just have some generative questions that we can kind of work through on how might we do this better, or maybe make recommendations for others to do this better within their clubs or communities or districts. So, all right, just let's do introductions again here. And what I didn't catch what your role was, Maureen, but I'll introduce myself, and then I'm the youth exchange chair for District 5400, and then I'm involved with NAYN and Wessex as well. But most of my time is spent as a youth exchange chair for my district. And what's your role, Maureen?
I'm on the district committee for our youth exchange program, and I'm new to the district. So I spent the year trying to understand how this district works, because someone told me, if you've seen one Rotary Youth Exchange program, you've seen one Rotary Youth Exchange program.
I bet that's true. I've only seen one. Well, I've gotten glimpses into others, but mine only. Okay, great.
Right,
Thank,
right.
thank you.
And I'm new to Eugene. So what I have to say about Eugene is fairly, I'm a new citizen here, so trying to figure out the schools and all of that, that's new to me. And I'm also been really involved with NIAN. I think this is my 12th NIAN that I was at. I love NIAN.
Okay, you
Yeah.
were at that conference as well. Okay, great, great. All right, Becky.
So I'm semi-involved with Rotary Youth Exchange in that I sit on the NIAN board, both as a representative from Wessex, and then I'm in the incoming secretary. But also I'm interested in kind of how we're partnering, because I think we can all do better, do more, work smarter within our districts and clubs. And my involvement right now at the district level is I am the district youth protection officer. So I have a lot at stake when people talk about being involved with youth, because I'm curious. Sounds like almost every district does it differently. So that's what my interest is.
Great. And Joan, welcome. If you're able to introduce yourself, we'd love it.
She's on mute.
Okay. Well, Joan, hop in and chat with us if you're able. And but I'll keep moving ahead here. Hello, Chris.
I just want to make sure everything's good with recording.
Yes, we're good. Thanks. All right. Well, what I'll do is I'm gonna share a screen here for notes. I didn't do slides because it's more of a brainstorm. Okay. So I've got several partnerships that I'll share, and then please interject if you know of things, and then let's definitely like talk about the ones that we're aware of. So kind of like current state here. I've got, let's see, when I reached out, we've got students that are participating in fundraisers, like walkathons. And that might be through their school or not, or just directly through an organization. We've had students get involved in community theater. We have our local YMCA provides, it's not much of a partnership exactly. It's more like they're supporting us. They provide complimentary pass for during their stay. And it's not true now, but our local ski resort, which is a nonprofit, provided ski passes for youth exchange. I couldn't talk them into it this year, but I mean, you know, if your community has something like that. And we have one of the members of our committee is the executive director of the Caldwell Housing Authority. Caldwell is a city in our district, and the Housing Authority it's a nonprofit. It's funded through federal and state funds for low income housing for migrant farm workers primarily. But they have a nice facility that they offer up to us for events, and they also have what used to be a Boys and Girls Club on their campus, and now it's just like a clubhouse, and they'll host some of our student retreat at it. So it's just put you know, local nonprofit partnership offering facilities and gathering space overnight, just like overnight. And we've done a better job in recent years of integrating service projects into our youth exchange retreats. Anything coming to mind in your areas?
My District 5020 is pretty large geographically. We involve Vancouver Island and then most of most of Western Washington, just not King County or north of King County. Yep. So it's pretty long, right? It's long and narrow. And I would say most of these many partnerships exist at the club level and not at the district level.
Interesting.
For instance, we have often had the YMCA provide, well, they still do, they provide a free pass for as long as the student's in country. So, and we also do a service project at our annual conference that involves the youth exchange. Actually, I think I probably started that years ago, and we've tried to keep it up, or keep that consistent. It'll be interesting to see what we do this coming spring in a couple of weeks. But the students are really encouraged. Well, they're not always encouraged, but we talk about it at inbound orientation, and they'll talk about it again, or they talked about it again in February when they did their annual Comox rendezvous. about that service aspect, but it's hard to gauge which students are being involved in it or which aren't. I know in my community, we would get all the kids together routinely to work at Emergency Food Network, and we may be repacking food into smaller, more usable quantities. So instead of a whole crate, literally a large crate of apples, they'd dump them into a bin, and we'd pick out 6 or 8 or 10 apples and put them in a smaller bag. So it was called repack. We've had students involved in community theater here. We've had students volunteer at a variety of organizations where they have an interest, i.e. the Humane Society. And one student volunteered at a nonprofit that worked with seniors because she was particularly interested in that. So we try to set up service and get kids involved in that, but I'm not sure, what that is looking like at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
This is Maureen, and I would say I could speak more to 50/20 than I can to my new district. But every time the kids were together, we would talk about how Rotary is about service.
Yeah.
And what kinds of things are you doing? And we'd ask, raise your hand, what kinds of things? And we heard all kinds of stories.
One of my favorite stories was, Maureen, you may remember his name. I don't off the top of my head. The young man from Kyrgyzstan who couldn't believe that we would do, I think it was him, that we were giving books out as a service project. He always thought that service in his community meant that he was in trouble. Community service often has that connotation.
Well, I'm thinking of the student when we were there for the district conference and we were cleaning up a park. And he was from one of the Scandinavian countries. Says, this never happens.
Yeah.
Scandinavia. Yep. We're just regular people doing this work. I get this home. Yeah, he was amazed that we were doing service in a park.
Yeah, it was at McKinley Park. I know that park well.
Yep.
Yep. So part of it is, I think, with youth exchange is that whole education piece, and how do the districts instill that sense of community service, because truly that's what one of our pillars is in Rotary.
Right.
And then how often are they checking in with that? Because certainly, I mean, I would say we're not here to entertain them.
I think that, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Because when I think about I guess, I hear bits and pieces about different programs, and I think about our program over the years with different leadership or every class is just a little bit different. Every class of students, we're a pretty small district. Our average class is 15. If you go back over the last 10 years, it's probably 15 students is probably the average inbound class. And outbound class is 15. And so there's a lot of room for a few personalities to really kind of change the culture of that group, I find that fascinating. But there are certain years when it feels like it's less service oriented because they're here for the travel. It's not really there's a common misconception that this is a travel program. And, you have a group that just spends the year finagling as much like time out of school or travel or road trips, or like, it's kind of crazy how some groups are more prone to that than others, but it changes every year. But I think the better job that we do to instill service, to kind of keep that in the center. Yeah. I was thinking about, going into this, I'll just like a little I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here when I talk about this stuff, but you know, we are about service, but I think as volunteers of the program, I know for me, a lot of times I just get caught up in all the logistics of like visas and youth protection compliance and placements in schools and all of the, you know, and getting host families like set up in time for the move, or all of those things, that it's service kind of starts to, it feels like a secondary priority. It shouldn't be though. I mean, that's on me, but I think
Well, I
that
think it's one thing. I always feel like if you're operating at the, I mean, someone in the district needs to help champion this whole service theory, right? Not just, and it doesn't have to be you as a chair, or like it could be anybody on your district committee, as long as the kids are hearing that message and engaging in it. You know, again, I think club YEOs need to get that clearly, that it's not a year of entertainment. I mean, sadly, our club has adopted the bucket list theory with our youth exchange kids, or at least our club has, I should say. And nowhere on his bucket list do I see things about service or understanding, other. Yeah, it's all about, I want to go here or there or do this activity or that activity. So, and yet I know that our student in our club happens to be involved in some service projects, but not all of them. I mean, yeah.
I would say the other thing about service is to keep track of your rebound students when they come back. Because there are some kids who say, well, I went to 2 Rotary meetings during the year. That was it. They barely had any contact with Rotary. And then you have other kids who came and said, our club did this with the seniors, and we did that with low-income people. We did all these things, and they could list things off from their club. Now, it may be not associated with a district, but to keep track of the clubs, often if the district is involved in service, the clubs are going to be involved in service. So to keep track of the students who didn't do anything with Rotary.
yeah, that reminds me of a topic that came up at the NAN conference, actually, in one of the sessions that I was working in, that I attended, I mean, and it was, how do we build Rotex? That was kind of the general topic. But then the question came up in terms of like, how much ownership do we take over these students as a club? Because there's a small number of volunteers that are specific to the program, but does the club really engage with and embrace having access to these younger people? Do they pull them into the service projects? Do they mentor them? What struck me, it was when Sophia Smith spoke at the plenary session at NAN, and she talked about, she's a recent graduate from USC, and she went on exchange in 2016-17. And she said that her outbound coordinator in ScanX, Warren, was just a really connected. He just stayed connected with her, pulled her into these sorts of things, and kind of mentored her through the Rotary journey, and said, hey, you're going to college, you should check out Rotaract, or here's some access to Rotex, and just kind of was there and nudged her through that process. And I just wondered, I often hear within my own club and others, it's like, gosh, these young people, we really would like to get them engaged, and they just disappear. But what have we done to keep them? Or, so I think it kind of starts with service, and getting them involved, and indoctrinating is kind of an odd word to use, but yeah, getting them included and feeling part of it and thinking about how we can be a part of that.
Hey, Mike, can you take yourself off of, or can you take the spotlight off? I see you or I see Maureen once in a while. Can you go, do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? The speaker view, you have it on. Okay, so you're still spotlighted. I don't know how that happened. All right, never mind.
I don't know how to unspotlight. I don't see that I am spotlighted.
Yeah, so on my screen, you're a big picture in the middle. And you just stop sharing your screen share.
Yeah, let me try again.
That's all right. I was just hoping to
see the notes.
Yeah, we'll go back over there. I can see the notes now. Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure how that. Yeah, I know
how that feature works. Yeah, me neither.
as a co-host, I don't have
No power.
not as much as I thought.
All right.
Okay. I can pin myself, but I'm not pinned. Maybe I was before.
All right, not a problem.
Well, let's explore that idea, Maureen, of like keeping track of rebound students. What have you seen work with that?
Well, I know from my old district, the Rotex kids were really hard to keep track of because in North America, in this country, it seems like people go away to college. So they leave their home communities and they go away to college. The most involved kids go away to college. So one of the things I think we can keep track of is find out who are the former Rotary Exchange students who are older now. Because we can pull them back into the program. We can, they can help us with service. And they can help us with with excuse me, the when we're orienting the kids, they can help us with orientation.
Yeah.
Great with that. And they're everywhere. We just have to find them.
They
Right.
could help us with all steps of youth exchange, I actually think, from interviewing to
Yes.
And they are hard. I mean, and that's where we have to become even savvier because they're not on many of them young professionals I'm tracking, and some of them are former youth exchange students I'm tracking down on LinkedIn. Because it certainly isn't going to be Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're talking about this and you're well aware of this, Becky, but Maureen, we're at the NAN level. We're talking about how can we use the information we have from their past participation to capture them again.
Right.
Like it might be through their parents, like maybe just connect with their parents and ask them if they know where their students are. But yeah, they're so mobile, it's hard to know. And then I know recently in my district, a student who came from, she went to Germany, but she was sent when she was in Yakima, Washington. And then her parents moved to Boise while she was on exchange. And then she came back to Boise, finished high school, and would have been otherwise disconnected, except her dad happens to be Rotarian and came to my club and joined and brought her with him. And I was like, you've got to be involved. But it was just a happy coincidence that we find them. But I know there's got to be others, right? So if students go away to college, then they're in another town where there's probably a Rotary, right? So, just finding them would be great.
So I've got a quick story. When I moved to Eugene, I live on top of a hill. It's a very short street. There's 8 houses on the street. And when the COVID vaccine came out, my son-in-law, who lives 4 doors down from me, said, we've got to have a party. And so it's going to be at our house. We're going to get everybody together because we're all vaccinated. And so it came together, and some of the neighbors knew each other, but many of us were kind of new to the neighborhood, and we're kind of waving to each other and not really interacting. And so that night at dinner, someone says to the man who lives across the street from my daughter, says, have you been home lately? And he goes, no, I live on an island and it's kind of hard to get to because of the restrictions. And no, I haven't been home yet. And I said, what island do you live in? He says, it's in Canada. I said, what island is it? He said, it's Vancouver Island. I said, I know Vancouver Island quite well. I was up there 6 times a year. And he goes, what for? And I said, well, it was with Rotary Youth Exchange. And he looked at me, he goes, I was a Rotary Exchange student. And my daughter, who's sitting across from him, said, so was I. And so was my brother. He said, what district? And she said, your district. I was on the US side. And then the guy down the street says, my daughter was a Rotary Exchange student. So that's 3 households with 4 Rotary Exchange students. So the young man who lives across the street from my daughter, he's close to 40. He's a city planner. I'm inviting him to our Rotary Club. My daughter's an emergency room physician. She's got 2 small kids. She goes, Mom, we'll host later. We'll be involved, but not with 2 small kids. And the guy who's the former president of the club, whose daughter was a youth exchange student, said, well, she lives up north in Portland. I'll have her get in touch with Rotary. So you can find them.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, if we're talking about these, I was thinking about another angle on this too, is that our partners could benefit a lot in certain ways if we're by having this potential international volunteer pool. There's some dynamic there that could add more diversity of experience and thought and to that, and that might be an angle or a discussion point of like maybe there are some specific organizations that would be attractive for. But I really liked, Becky, what you said in terms of like getting students to pursue organizations where they have a particular interest, like the Humane Society or senior services that you'd mentioned. And but also, like, what's the benefit of the organization to have of these students? Do you have any thoughts around that? Like, if we're talking win-win, win-win, the win for the student is it's a more enriched experience. The win for the club is that they are getting more connected if they're involved in that. What's the, aside from the labor or help, are there other ways to think about this as a benefit to the organizations to have this international element? Can you think of any?
I'm struggling with that. I mean, obviously it's the volunteerism, right, that they win from. But I also think of a couple of kids that we sent off to have some tutoring done after school at a local group up on the hilltop in Tacoma. And the last student with that we sent over there actually ended up helping some of the younger kids that were there to get services who spoke Spanish, as did he. He worked as a great kind of communicator, right? Because he was helping them learn English. He was getting help with his math, but he could help. So I guess it was that enriched relationship that occurred between the 2 nonprofits, our Rotary Club kids and that nonprofit. So, I do think it's about that relationship building, because you never know where that's going to go with any of the nonprofits in that are around town. I mean, you just don't know what what will come out of that, you
Yeah,
know?
true. My son was a exchange student, went to Denmark, and volunteered at a daycare, which was great for his language learning, because in Denmark you don't learn English. Everyone knows English, but you don't learn it until you're about 5 years old. Not intentionally anyway. And so it's like kindergarten when they start to learn English. So he was working with kids under 5,
Oh, that's great.
and he had to learn Danish to speak with them. But that's such a great age to learn a language with, because they're so non-judgmental, and they enjoy helping, so he actually learned a lot more Danish than a lot of students because of that, because it's so easy to avoid Danish in Denmark, really.
Oh, that's great. Huh.
But that's that so language related service, that's a great one. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
So the other thing I was going to say is when I'm looking for host families in the Olympia area, I would go to the local Peace Corps organization. So they're all people who've lived overseas for 2 years, all over the world. And I always every year got one person out of that organization to be a host family.
That is a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Talk about win-win. And probably you could do the same thing with got any people in your community who have diplomatic services, to anything where they lived out of the country for overtime, and they really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Missionary families. In Olympia, we were pretty close to the base outside of up to between Tacoma and Olympia, and there's military families too who have overseas experience.
Oh, yeah. Great ideas. How do you suppose, I think some of the most meaningful connections would be not at the district organizes these projects, but to further enrich the students' experience, it would be better if they had a more strong connection with their club, and in their community, which their club is the gateway to their community. So how might we nudge clubs or encourage clubs to do more initiation of service with their youth exchange? Because like you said earlier, I think you said this, Becky, that they'll come back, or no, maybe it was you, they'll come back and say they've attended 2 club meetings. Like, and historically, like, the reasons that students come home early, like not having a good relationship with their host club is in the top 5 reasons why students don't
Yep.
make it right through their whole year. So how might we encourage clubs to do more service?
Is this overseas or here here in North America?
Here in North America for our inbounds. Yeah.
I felt like our clubs who hosted youth exchange students really involved them in whatever service projects they were doing. I suppose we could remind the YEOs, if your club's doing anything, include the youth exchange students, but we would always tell our students who are going out, Rotary here is going to be different in your host country. And that you have to seek out service. You have to say, I want to come to the meetings. You have to like nudge yourself into everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. To tell the students to nudge themselves in and remind the YOs to include them, right?
Right, right.
Remind students.
Remind outbound students to
Outbound,
nudge.
yeah, outbound students.
Yeah. I have a couple of stories I tell about that. Like, you just never know what kind of, for the student, like, you just never know what sort of opportunities you would get from Rotarians. Are typically really well connected, and some are really well resourced. I mean, like, I know my goddaughter went on exchange to Germany and was really worked hard to get involved with our club, and just got a lot of access into events because there were just Rotarians in her club who always went to the symphony or always went to, football, soccer games, or hockey, whatever was going. So she was able to get a lot of connection and friendship, but also just interesting opportunities to see different things. But that would go for service too.
So if you could put in your notes to remind outbound students.
Yeah. Question here. Becky, since you're youth protection officer, are there particular things that, when you think about clubs doing more service with students, are there any challenges or things for consideration from a youth protection standpoint that need that, I don't know, does it create a barrier, or does it create a challenge, or do you see any, what are
I
your
see it, it creates everything. How does that sound?
Yeah.
So depending again on the district, I think that, so the person who's in control of the student, does that make sense? Whether it's the host parent
Yeah.
or the YEO, or or somebody on the youth exchange committee that's going to be at the service event, they're fine. I mean, because we know they're all vetted, right? But it's when we, depending again on the district, so it varies district by district about who has to get vetted and certified. Maybe not even in the YEA system, because they're not going to have ongoing contact with some of these kids, at least they may not, but what about the other system? So it is a barrier, I think, in some respects, because while it's not intended to be a barrier, it does, it depends on how much contact they're going to have, what kind of contact they're going to have, etc. So it can be a huge issue, whether it's these kids or any other kid, frankly.
Yeah.
Our district is encouraging all members to take the online youth protection training, but that's a slow slog, and so they have to, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've asked club youth protection officers to be pushing that information out and sending it out, and some do and some don't. And so,
Yeah.
but I also don't have the capacity to play the cop in that situation.
Right. Yeah, that's a big challenge. I was just thinking of there's a one of our clubs that keeps their students really involved, and but some of the things that they've done in the past just don't pass muster with youth protection. And so they saw a drop off of people interested in participating. They're like, oh, I have to go through this, I guess I just won't do it. And so we had to come up with ways that was like easier for them to go through youth protection training, like to do it as a group or something, so that they could get to that point where they could resume that level of involvement.
Yeah, and then it doesn't, for those of us who use youth volunteer management system, you have to take the test because there's no way you
Yeah.
can enter something else. You know, so it's a little bit of a drag, frankly. I know that, again, other districts do other things. I recently was at a district in Southern California and they manage who takes the online youth protection training and a background check. And that's all that they require of their volunteers. So they're not doing of their youth volunteers, not youth exchange volunteers. But like I had a club yesterday in our own district say, I had a club president reach out to me and he said, I'm being told I can't sit on our youth exchange committee, even as the club president, and even though I'm vetted in the other system, because I'm not vetted in the youth volunteer management system.
Hmm.
And I said, hogwash, he's
Yeah.
vetted as a host parent. So, you know, really, what do you want? So
Right. Yeah.
I just told him, you know.
I think that, and I know your district is really good at getting club youth protection officers identified. That's something that my district doesn't have.
Yeah.
We're a few years behind you, I guess, in that progress. But
Oh, trust me, we're
yeah.
slow going at this point.
But if that infrastructure were in place, that is really the best. That is really the best scenario, because then that person is in the club, they know what's going on, and they can kind of keep their fingers on the tab, you know, on the tabs of the service projects and which ones have youth involved. It
Yep.
seems it could be complicated by having partners, like if you're sending students out to volunteer at different organizations, what's their youth protection effort, and
Yeah.
so.
And so it opens up a can of, it opens up a huge quagmire.
Yeah. I think it's just a consideration, but it's important work to do the service, and it's equally as important or more so for the youth protection, but hopefully one doesn't inhibit the other.
Right.
But when we think about the majority of service projects, they're often one day. There's probably other Rotarians around, and the opportunity for someone to interact with a student inappropriately just doesn't happen that much. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, it does, Maureen. It does.
Yeah. Well, we have 4 minutes left. I think, just trying to think what we might do to recap this. What are your takeaways?
That one takeaway for me is that districts need a service champion on their committee, or at least that they need to be sharing the message of service as a Rotary pillar. I think another takeaway for me was that, well, a sub related to that they need to, districts, whenever their kids are together, they need to encourage, they need to continue the conversation about what are they doing of service in their community, and or if it's possible to do a community service event when they pull the students together.
It seems like every time the students are together, there should be service involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if it's just a couple hours. Doesn't have to be the whole day, but a couple hours.
I love that. To kind of get away from that whole idea of I am here to be entertained, or this is
Right.
this is a travel program, and yeah.
You're here to serve.
Yeah.
Well, I do believe, I don't know if you can hear me in Seattle. Well, I'm up in Maple Valley, and I'm so sorry I came in late.
Hi, Jan.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. Glad to have you here.
So, you touched on youth protection. I think that one of our takeaways, and I don't believe that youth protection simply is a physical protection. There's a lot of verbal things that happen in our older community of Rotarians that shouldn't be happening today. And I think it's an excellent opportunity for youth protection to be trained at all Rotarian level, just to bring everybody up to speed of what is acceptable, not acceptable, what is today's environment.
Yeah.
And then when you spoke about needing servicing every time the students are together, I think sometimes you need to get a little bit of fun in there and to get food, fun, and things happening before you get students servicing and communicating with each other. It's, just in our group, we like to say, all right, everybody move tables and sit with somebody that you don't know.
Yeah.
Even at the Rotarian level, you have to do that because we're all in a clique in one way or another.
Yeah. Let's see. How do I capture that? We're talking about inserting fun into the service, or
Well, I think in order to get service with students, with young people and older people too, you need to have fun.
Yeah.
And then move it into the service. But yes, service every time. That's super, super important.